Welcome to the Hidden Bookcase. Come in, have a seat, get comfy.
It's just next to the sliding library ladder and right below the shelf titled Spooky Month.
Pick a book, your favourite book. That's the one that opens this room. Inside you'll find a warm fire, a loving cat, and a wide skylight to the stars.
And a really towering to be read pile.
I'm Morgan, I use they them pronouns, and I am a creepy doll hiding inside your oven.
I'm Sorren, I use he him pronouns, and I am a ceramic duck.
We've been friends for 10 years and are always swapping books.
But despite having the same taste in books, we never get round to reading each other's recommendations. It's always just another book on the pile.
It's a seriously big pile now. It might crush me in my sleep. So each month we're going to force each other to read a book.
The new reader will give a blind summary of the book, we'll both go away and read it, and then we'll return to chat about it.
So this week, let's get to talking about
Family Business by Jonathan Sims. So Morgan, neither of us had read this book. When we decided to record this episode, neither of us had read it, but how come we chose it?
Well, we have a long and storied history with Mr. Jonathan Sims.
Can I just actually interject here? We are going to call Jonathan Sims Johnny at least a couple of times, and we don't know him. I was listening to old episodes and we're saying, Morganson, very professionally, very English literature A level, but we're just going to call him Johnny because we spent too much time
in the Magnus Archives fandom. Because you have to. There's Jonathan Sims, the character from the Magnus Archives, and then there's Johnny Sims, the writer. That's how you differentiate.
And for those listening who don't know the Magnus Archives, Jonathan Sims named the protagonist of his horror podcast, the Magnus Archives, after himself, Jonathan Sims.
In his defense, it was supposed to not be that much of a fiction podcast with a meta plot originally, so that's his one defense.
So Morgan, what's our history with Johnny?
It must have been a few years ago. Time has no meaning anymore. You were like, oh, I've started listening to the Magnus Archive, and you got maybe like 20 episodes in and then just kind of didn't listen to it anymore. So I was like, oh, Soren recommended this to me. Kind of, ish, not really, but he mentioned it, so I'm going to listen to it. And about 2 weeks later I went, so Soren, I've finished the Magnus Archives. We were in season 4 at that point. I'm absolutely not a horror person, but it just tickled all the right places in my brain. And then all our friend group kind of slowly devolved into madness by all getting into the Magnus Archives. So I've been a fan of Mr. Johnny Sims for a while. We've both read his other book, 13 Stories. So that's how we got into reading things by Johnny Sims.
That's how Family Business got on our radar and became an anticipated release to us.
What is Family Business about?
Family Business follows a young woman who has just lost her best friend slash flatmate. She ends up quitting her job partly out of grief. She ends up working for the bereavement cleaners who cleaned up after her roommate died. And then she starts to notice strange things happening, a kind of a strange dynamic in this family business that she's entered into. Subsequently, spooky things continue to happen.
Spooky, spooky.
Should we listen to our blind reaction?
Yes, I'm so curious.
So, Morgan, we have not read Family Business by Jonathan Sims. What do you think is going to happen? What do you know about it?
Okay, it's going to be vibes. It's going to be horror. We know that much. It's going to be anti-capitalism. Someone's going to eat human meat. You just know, it's Johnny Sims. Someone's going to consume human meat.
I don't know. It looks like it's set in a morgue from the cover.
Someone's going to eat human meat, Soren. It's got human bodies in it.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
And it's Johnny.
Exactly. And there's going to be gays. Of course there's going to be gays.
Yeah, I'm assuming that it will be a little queer. I was thinking that we were doing this for the Hidden Bookcase, so we're just assuming that it will be queer. But it's Jonathan, so I trust him, and I think he'll put some gays in it. I'm going to throw out a wild guess and say that this one isn't going to be sort of anthology-ish, because he's done that with Magnus, and he's done that with 13 Stories. So I feel like he's going to take a new tact, and it's going to be one set of characters.
Do we think we're going to get a transcript chapter like we did in 13 Stories?
I think there'll be something spicy. I don't think it'll just be straight narration throughout the whole thing. I think we'll do something experimental at some point like that.
Do we think it's going to be, like, real horror? Real horror I'm defining as, like, not fantasy sci-fi. When I say real, I mean, like, real-life horror. Or do we think it's going to be a little bit eldritch, a little bit weird?
It's got to be a little bit eldritch and weird, surely. Also, I had this thing with 13 Stories where, with the little bloody stain on the cover, I was wondering if it was going to be a bit gorier than the Magnus Archives, but then 13 Stories wasn't, so I'm now thinking that Family Business will also be fine, because I'm not personally a big fan of that.
Killing floor vibes.
I think it might be gorier, but I don't think it will get to the point that I won't be able to handle it.
Do we think it's going to be a tragedy? Do we think it's going to be a tragedy?
Yes, okay, I feel like he's done 13 Stories basically had a happy ending, so no way. we've got to go back. We've got to...
Give me the tragedy, Johnny.
The curve is to normalise, exactly.
So, what did we get right? What did we get wrong?
You were right about someone getting eaten, a human getting eaten, but not by another human. So, not sure if that counts.
Disappointing. Where's the cannibalism, Johnny? Come on.
And also, while alive,
Mm.
tragedy, kind of a mix. They got away in the end, but it was still sad.
Yeah, it wasn't world-ending tragedy or bittersweet tragedy. It was just kind of like, we survived, but we lost a lot. I feel like it was gorier than I was expecting. The second half, specifically.
The climax in particular.
It took a very sharp turn into gore.
The teeth in the throat was something.
I liked that. Is it sharks that do that? Sharks and guinea pigs. Have you seen guinea pigs? Have you seen their teeth?
I mean, not in huge detail, no.
They have 4 teeth on either side and then like a spiral of teeth going back into their throat.
That's horrifying.
It's like a chewing tunnel. Horrifying. That's what I was thinking when I was reading that chapter.
Oh, we were right about it being supernatural.
Yeah.
Everything so far has kind of felt like it could even be set in the Magnus Archives universe, including 13 stories. We were right about it being queer.
We were right about it being queer. The moment Zen showed up, I was like, that's a funky name.
Frank is not naming his daughter Zen with an X.
And then she kept going. I was like, oh, trans t-shirt. Iconic.
Dia as well, of course, and Angie.
Angie, we're going to jump ahead to characters for a second because Angie fits my favourite tropes in so many ways.
Character that haunts the narrative without appearing.
Yeah, that one for one. And then the other one is person who has no reason to be violent, but is like, I just wanted to know what it would be like to actually hurt somebody.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Creepy child vibe. And she's like so ready to go to bat for Dia. The violent friend and the pacifist friend, and the violent friend protecting the pacifist friend, is one of my favourite dynamics. So the moment we got that flashback, eating it up. I wanted more of Angie. I know this is unrealistic, but I wanted her ghost to show up at the end, and I knew that was never going to happen because it wasn't that kind of horror. But still made me sad. Because she was so cool. And she was dead the whole time. Why would you make a character that cool and then kill her off before the book even starts?
That's pretty Jonathan Sims' track record, to be fair.
I know.
Speaking of Angie and the rest of the queer characters, sometimes when straight authors write queer characters, you can kind of feel that they're just writing queer characters to tick a diversity box. There's a lack of understanding of what the queer experience is. There'll be a superficial understanding. Whereas the layers of it, this whole thing about how Angie and Dia came out as bi at the same time, and a lot of people thought they were a couple. Dia had this thing of like, am I in love with her? Am I not in love with her? When she lost her, people were like, well, I don't really understand why it's such a big deal. She wasn't your partner. It very much read like a queer platonic relationship, and it was just nice to see that. And the way that she connects with Zen later. The queerness in his books is very, they're like implicitly queer. Like if you took the queerness away from them, they would be missing a lot.
Yeah. Is Johnny Sims straight?
No.
Okay, just checking, because you were like, straight authors.
No, I mean authors who are straight, as in not Johnny.
I was just checking in. I was like,
I'm pretty sure that he and his partner are bi. I meant that you can tell that he's not, basically, but I don't want to say that because obviously people can come out on their own time, and I don't want to read a book and then assume that somebody's straight and then just be wrong and they just have a different experience to me. This feels like it was written by a queer author.
You can tell.
Yeah.
Complete segue, but this reminds me of something we missed in our checkbox of what we thought was going to be in here. Rage against the British government.
Oh, that was definitely in there.
It's such a core part of how Johnny writes. It was amazing. Gotta have at least one Tories joke.
Exactly.
Very funny. I did lose it a little bit.
The way it came in right at the end was so funny. He was like, just in case anybody didn't get this, I know I named the antagonist Mr. Bill, but actually the capitalist system is the enemy, especially when Tories are in charge of it. Goodbye.
The whole premise of people who fall through the cracks are easy victims, and then even Frank justifying it with, well, it's their fault they've fallen through the cracks, which is the sort of myth that is put out by Tories. Like, you just need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yeah.
It's very inherent in the world building of this book. You can feel the rage, how disappointing and enraging it is that this is a thing that happened. This is a book that could easily just be real. You'd never know because nobody cares. And that's what's awful about it.
Exactly. I think as well as the rage, you can also, and I think this is a hallmark of Johnny's writing in general, there's a very deep compassion for the subject. This book follows bereavement cleaners. One of the very first episodes of the Magnus Archives is about a binman. Across all of Johnny's works, we get to see the perspectives a lot of people often looked down upon by society, unhoused people, refugees, the mentally ill. The fact that Johnny will make these people protagonists, even just for a little while. Like anyone else, I'm sure Johnny has implicit biases and prejudices, but this is someone that clearly believes that all of these people are people and deserve empathy and consideration, which really shouldn't be a high bar, but unfortunately, it's rare.
And he's talked a lot about how much he researches roles before he talks about them in fiction.
Yeah, you can definitely tell.
I would believe that this was written by somebody who used to be a bereavement cleaner.
Absolutely. We haven't talked all about the cover. We've jumped straight into the narrative.
Yeah, because we've both read it as an ebook, we don't really have the book as an artifact.
Makes it more difficult to get an impression of it. I mean, I think it will look nice next to 13 Stories. They seem to sort of match palette-wise. It's definitely not the kind of book that I would pick up, but at the same time, I don't usually go for horror genres.
It's an okay cover. It gives you what you need, but I don't like real-looking people on the cover, and it looks too real. It looks like a photo, but it will look really pretty next to 13 Stories. Let's talk writing style. Once you get into a Johnny Sims book, it's really easy to read because he has this sort of conversational tone with dialogue especially, and he has a very good way of making simple a description. He's just like, I'm going to rate this to things that you understand, and that's really useful. I do think starting a Johnny Sims book is quite hard. I think he's used to writing long form fiction, so the first chapter is quite info dumpy. But once I was into it, I was flying along. How did you find it?
I think I found the beginning okay. I mean, I like his style. I think he's like a very competent writer. He's good at what he does. He's good at creating suspense. He's good at making things creepy without being like, and there was blood everywhere. He's good at a slightly more subtle scenario. One that just comes to mind is when Dia has to go back into the building that's been collapsed to go and unwedge a piece of lumber so that they can take it out. And I was like, I'm so freaked out. But like, nothing's really ostensibly happening here. There's something about the way that he described the cramped doorway just creates that foreboding sense.
Yeah. The scene when she was in her own apartment alone,
Oh, yeah.
yelling at walls, searching every cupboard, and then she couldn't go into Andy's room just in case because she was like, I'm certain there's something on the side of that door. I only read ebooks in the dark. I'm like, oh, I've got the lights turned off. I'm going to bed, so I can't read my book. I'll read my ebook.
I think you need to get a lamp.
I have a lamp. It's a cost of living crisis, Sorren.
Okay.
Okay. I can't be reading at 2 a.m. So I had to stop reading this book for a bit because I was creeping myself out because it was 2 a.m. and all these really terrifying things are happening. I was getting too creeped out.
Yeah, I was mostly reading during the day, but I did have one scene I had to skim, which was the scene where she found Dia's stuffed animal in the apartment and then it was full of moths. There's something very specific about stuffed animals in horror that always gets me. I hate it. I don't know why.
I was glad it was moths. I was expecting something worse.
Spiders?
I was expecting spiders.
I was on the bus and I just stopped because I had to get off at the next stop anyway. I was just thinking about moths as a horror trope. I was like, they do always go with moths because they can fly, but they're not butterflies because butterflies would sound stupid. And I suppose moths eat through old clothes, which ties nicely to the themes of erasure and forgetting, but I think it would be equally horrifying to be swarmed by malevolent butterflies, even if it's a bit more colourful. But yet, if it was just butterflies, that would still really ruin the dramatic tension of the scene. I have to admit, when we got that little insight into Mr. Bill's history, I had a brief moment of, oh, I really wish I could read that book. I would love some historical fiction from Johnny Sims. We know he can do it because certain episodes of the Magnus Archives are more historical. The epistolary ones, where there's a letter or something that turns into a statement.
Give me a narrator who's actually a terrible person who makes this deal in the first place.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
I have to say, I feel like the two genres of horror didn't quite jive.
Mm-hmm.
I did really enjoy it, but there's the first half of the book, which is all like ghosts and visions and creepy stuff, and then there's Mr. Bill. And Mr. Bill didn't feel like he quite fit the vibe of the rest of the book.
Yeah, I think he was a little bit unsubtle at the end. That's such a... That's like a really British way to say that he ate somebody alive.
Yeah, it felt very different. It felt quite rushed.
Yeah.
That whole scene with the world going wrong and everything being weird in the back garden, the house changing, was so creepy and so vibey, and I absolutely loved that. But Mr. Bill just stretching his hands and opening his door and eating people, I don't know, it kind of broke the suspension of disbelief a little bit for me.
Yeah, I think because the build-up is so slow, and then Denimoy is like so sudden, when even like a couple of chapters ago we were still trying to convince ourselves that these visions were real, or Dia was still trying to convince herself that visions were real.
The most unrealistic thing was the doctor, who was actually helpful and suggested brain scans and stuff like that. That was unrealistic. Blocked.
Exactly.
It's like, where's the waiting list?
On the NHS, I was thinking that.
Where's the you're fine? Where's the have you tried taking iron pills?
When she was like, I'm going to see the doctor, I was like, surely what's going to happen here is that she's not going to be able to see a doctor until way too late. But she saw a doctor so fast. I wish I could see my doctor that fast. Apparently this is a utopian thing. I don't know, maybe she has private healthcare. Maybe the Sloan Sons pay really well.
Would you want to be a bereavement cleaner?
No, I'd be so bad at it. I'd rather not that would be my day job. I think that would be bad for my mental health.
That is fair. That is fair.
I think it's bad for most people's mental health. And actually, you mentioned killing Flora in Our Blind React, which, for those that don't know the Magnus Archives, is an episode of the Magnus Archives about a butchery. Since listening to the Magnus Archives, partially because of the Magnus Archives, I've gone from pro-circumstantial cannibalism omnivore to a vegetarian, which I think Johnny would be very disappointed to hear. Although, to be clear, I am still pro-circumstantial cannibalism. But the point is that listening to Killing Floor made me think about the human toll of slaughtering animals day in, day out, and do some research into the mental health aspect of that, which is obviously that it's disastrous. I thought that was interesting because I guess theoretically everyone could be vegetarian, then nobody would have to butcher animals, and then we would solve that problem. I'm not saying that that's what should happen. I'm just saying that that's a theoretical possibility. People are going to die, and people need to clean it up. Presumably it's not great for your brain, but how do you get around that?
Good pay and a therapist.
Yeah. At least until we have incredibly good robots who can just do it for you. And even then, what if the robots become sentient and they don't want to do it either? now we're screwed.
God damn it, thinking too far ahead.
I do feel like anytime I read a Jonathan Sims book, I'll think about something that I haven't thought about, which is always nice.
Which is what horror is supposed to do. Horror is not just supposed to be gore and sexual horror. It's supposed to make you think. It's supposed to exemplify the fears of the time and extrapolate on them.
Talking about animals and vegetarianism reminded me, I got really scared about Winston, because at least for the Magnus Archives, Johnny has a rule about not horribly killing pets.
That kept me going.
But I still got scared because I was like, did he just mean that for the Magnus Archives, or is this cat gonna die?
I'm holding you to that. I'm holding you to that.
You better not kill this cat. He's the only semblance of comfort that we have in this entire narrative.
Exactly.
And I guess queer board game night.
Queer board game night. Settlers of Catan. She should have played it. The fact that she'd never played it before, deprived.
Speaking of queer board game night, Damien from 13 Stories was there.
Was he?
Yeah, he was there. I was like, hey,
oh my
Damien.
God.
I didn't really have any bearing on anything, but I'm pretty sure that was him because he was at the queer board game night and his name was Damien with an A. So
that makes sense. I need to reread 13 Stories. Honestly, Damien was one of my faves. Thinking on my notes, because I've just remembered one, I have one bone to pick with Johnny Sims.
Ooh, go for it.
At one point in one of the scenes, he uses the word orbs to describe eyes, and I
completely missed that.
I could not. I was like, what in the Wattpad are you doing?
Was it for a human person, or was it for Mr. Bill or something?
Let's have a look.
Because I feel like contextually that could be okay, but if it's just a normal person, then maybe not.
I think it's about a dead body.
Okay, I think that's kind of allowed because it's creepy.
The eyes seem to gaze out at George as the raindrops dripped over the glassy, unseeing orbs.
I think it's questionable.
Just by association, I can't do it. I can't hack it.
On a slightly brighter note, Morgan, who was your favourite character?
Can I say Angie when she wasn't even in the book?
I think that counts. It's not favourite alive character.
I actually really liked Dia. I think Dia was actually a very compelling main character because she was a good balance of active and passive. Things were happening to her, and it took her a while to take control of the reins, but eventually she was actually you. So I think I really enjoyed her. She had good dynamic with the rest of the characters, and she just cared, which I really liked. She went and checked in with the
neighbour,
with the agoraphobe, the guy who had his house caved in, and actually took the time to speak to the houseless guy's family and actually bothered to go in and check and try to remember the names even though she couldn't. It's nice to see a character who genuinely cares.
Yeah.
What about you?
I think it might also have been Dia. Zen is a close second because how could it not be Zen? I mean, she punched Mr. Bill in the face. She's the one that makes the Tory joke. Johnny Sims is very good at character writing. Everyone feels very nuanced. Even Frank. Obviously what he was doing was extremely messed up, but you could completely understand why he was doing it. He had been trapped in this situation and that he just cared about his family. Mary felt really well fleshed out, her relationship with George, her want to be sensitive to these supernatural things in the face of her grief. But I did really like that grief actually that suffused everybody, everyone in the Slough family and Dia. That's what this book is about in a lot of ways, apart from the whole political aspect of it, that struggle between remembering and moving on. Where do you draw that line?
Yeah, when Dia says she wants her grief back during the confrontation.
Jonathan Sims books are weird to talk about when you've just read them as well, because they do leave you feeling a little bit depressed. I don't mean this at the moment, with the cost of living crisis, as you've mentioned, and the Queen dying and everyone deciding that a super expensive funeral is definitely the thing right now. It's just an interesting one at the moment.
Yeah, reading it around this time was very interesting.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it's going to continue to be topical. If this had come out in 2020, I would have been like, wow, so topical. People are dying and the government doesn't care. And unfortunately, in 2022, I'm like, wow, so topical. People are dying and the government doesn't care.
Yeah.
I think that will continue to be the reality for a while. I will say, I do think Jonathan Sims does a really good job of... It's difficult, I think, to write a book about a bunch of marginalised people dying and not have it be tragedy porn. And that's the only word that's coming to my brain. He manages to weave so much respect in at the same time, but also sympathy for these people as the victims, but also not portray them as helpless.
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe the counterbalance is that some of them survive at the end.
Yeah. Narrative style, the way that the visions were written so that they switched into a third person point of view where Dia actually assumed the thoughts and the pronouns fully was in that person's head and we got their point of view. That was so genius. That was really effective. Those passages were some of my favourite bits of the entire book. I mean, they were horrifying, but they were really well written and they really sort of threw you into it.
Yeah, I love those segments. Yeah, they do force you to empathise with that character in a very visceral way, which is good for getting the statement of the book across. Vital for it, really. Morgan, how did you rate Family Business? What are your final thoughts?
I rated it a 4 out of 5. I did enjoy it, but I think the tonal dissonance between the two halves didn't quite compel me. I think also because I do have a preference for long form fiction, so trying to get into singular novels is quite difficult for me. And I think I preferred 13 Stories a bit more. 4 out of 5 stars, that's where I'm at. What about you?
I think it's also a 4 from me. A very solid 4. Jonathan Sims is very good at what he does, and this is very effective. I don't feel like the burning urge to reread it, and a 5 has to be something really standout or memorable for me. This was very solid. I don't have any problems with it, really. So it feels a bit mean to give it a 4, but...
4 is very good.
Yeah, that's
to be fair. In a rating system, people forget that like a 3
is still more than half.
Is still, I liked it more than not.
Yeah, exactly. I also agree with the tonal dissonance thing at the end. That was a bit sudden.
Do you have any recommendations if people enjoyed Family Business?
I really just don't read a lot of horror and I'm just getting into it, so I don't feel confident recommending horror.
Same.
And it feels weird to recommend something else unless it had some really specific tropes in common or really specific themes in common.
Yeah, we don't want to come up with nonsense recs.
The recommendation is 13 Stories is good, and also you should definitely listen to the Magnus Archives.
I definitely would recommend reading 13 Stories if you haven't already read it.
So, next month, we are going to be reading urban sci-fi, and I'm going to be forcing Morgan to read In the Watchful City by Qiouyi.
Until then, you're always welcome through the bookcase.
Don't forget to scratch the cat on your way out.
Thank you for listening to The Hidden Bookcase, a production of Plain Our Prod. On this episode you heard Morgan Greensmith and Sorren Briarwood discussing Family Business by Jonathan Sims. You can find out more about this book at jonathan-sims.com, and you can follow Sims at Johnny Waistcoat on Twitter. You can find The Hidden Bookcase on Twitter at Hidden Bookcase, and on Instagram, Facebook, Tumblr and TikTok at Hidden Bookcase Podcast. Find out more about Plain Our Prod at plainourprod.com. Know what we should read next, or want to chat to us about what you thought of this episode's read? You can reach us at thehiddenbookcase@gmail.com, or send us a DM on social media. We'd love to hear from you. If you're enjoying The Hidden Bookcase, please consider leaving us a rating or review, or you can always tell a friend how to find us. Your whispers are the best way for bookworms to discover our show. November is Urban Science Fiction Month at The Hidden Bookcase. On our next episode, which will be out on Monday the 7th of November, we'll be discussing In the Watchful City by Qiouyi. We hope to see you then, and in the meantime, you're always welcome through the bookcase.